Alrighty guys, so today we have my 2013 GMC Sierra 1500. It's got the 5.3 in it, two-wheel drive. Lower control arm's giving me some problems. Seems like the ball joint is pretty well toast, or at least starting to go bad. So what we're gonna do is swap that out today. Yeah, she's pretty dirty, but should be no problem at all. Gotta love Southern California. No rust, just dirt. Tools, you're gonna want some of the basic stuff, you know, jack to get it up off the floor, jack stand for safety. I'm using air tools because we got an air compressor. You're also gonna want the new control arm. Guys, in a previous video, I did show you what it looks like when the ball joint has some play. It was just that short 10-second or so video that I made. So to check that, basically just jack it up off the ground, like there, tire off the floor. Get a big old pry bar, something you can have some leverage on, put it under the tire, start cranking on it. Alright guys, so here's this current front suspension setup. No plans on changing it anytime soon. It's only gonna cost about 10 grand to do what I want up in here. So we'll leave it the way it is for now. Ride's pretty smooth. Have severe duty brake pads from Wagner, standard Wagner disc. Moog outer tie rod with the Zerg fitting, so that's lubable. Have a CST lift spindle. Really like this piece because on the two-wheel drive trucks, one of the best things you can do is lift them, you know, 3.5 inches without negatively affecting any of your ride or steering geometry, which is probably one of the best parts about two-wheel drive trucks. Also a little cheaper than some of the other diff drop stuff for four-wheel drive. Not running a sway bar currently. I think it rides better. Some people say don't do it. I'm being pretty safe with it. Got a CST lift spindle. Best part about this piece is this back of the uniball, because it is a uniball piece. The uniball is, the back half is at least covered. Good thing about that is less dust introduction to the back of the uniball. These have about 20,000 miles on them. They're just dirty right now because I lube them pretty regularly. Also, I got some polyurethane bushings which come with the CST kit. Zerg fitting up in there, which is nice. Keeps them lubed, keeps them from squeaking, because obviously polyurethane squeaks a little easier. Standard lower control arm, aftermarket replacement from Moog. And then we got a Pro Comp coilover. It's a 2.75. I was told it was an internal bypass. Typical adjustment. There's an Allen key on this ring right here. You just spin that with a Fox 2.5-inch coilover adjuster. Also part of the CST kit is this extended braided brake line. Steel braid underneath, some rubber. Came with this grommet to mount it up. Have had no complaints on that. It actually friended with the pedal feel a little bit, because when I got this truck it had about 95-ish thousand miles on it. Now she's at 120. Got cotter pin, castle nut, typical. There's the video angle that I showed you before where you saw some play. And then we just got the standard lower control arm frame mounts. I'm gonna have to obviously undo the coilover. Trying to do this as easy as possible without taking too much apart, looking like just lower control arm and the coilover mount. And then might be able to swing that lower control arm out of the way. Hopefully you'll be able to support this spindle down here with the jack, and then just use a pickle fork to pop this out. Alrighty, so I got the lower control arm disconnected from that Pro Comp coilover. Like I was saying before, it should be pretty easily simple. All I had to do was just push down top of the spindle, a little bit on the caliper, just to get it to go down a little bit to free this up. Alrighty guys, so I took the castle nut and cotter pin off, obviously. Stud's no longer in the spindle. Popped it out with the pickle fork and the hammer. Pretty simple, didn't have to hit it too hard. Supporting the spindle, brake, upper control arm, everything like that with these here jack and shirt to not scratch up the rotor. And next is to just undo these lower control arm to frame bolts. Then I'll wiggle it all out, and you know, this might actually be a pretty easy job. Alrighty guys, so now the lower control arm's out. Do a little bit of hammer magic. Pulled out those bolts on the bottom, went simple enough. So here's the old lower control arm. Moog, what they do is, they have these integral bushings. Not really a fan of them. A little more low profile than standard. It's kind of hard to tell in the video, but there is some play in here. I could definitely tell it when I was turning. So what happened was, I would turn left all the way, go to full lock, going slow, a little bit on the brake, kind of like you're about to back into a parking spot. And it would pop, 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 and then go back the other way, try to back in the spot, turn it to the right. It would do one big pop like it was sucking back in. that was what initially let me look at this side. I could feel it on the floorboard actually. It's pissing me off. Guess I'm a little anal about my truck. I can hear and listen to and feel all those tiny little things. It was really bugging me, especially when I go back into spots. So decided to tear it down, fix it. Everything else seems pretty tight up in here. Upper control arms, like I said, give me no problems. While I'm down here, could probably clean it up a little bit, buy some things down, lube up this tie rod end, because with the wheel that I'm running, I actually can't get the grease gun on there. So for me to lube this tie rod end, I actually need to take the wheel off. So while I'm off, I'll do it now. Spray some Tri-Flow up on there. Actually, here's what the Tri-Flow, here's what I use. This stuff right here seems to be pretty solid as far as keeping it lubed. I'm probably doing it a little too much. Well, I guess too much is relative. Live down a dirt road, probably do about 25,000 miles a year, if not closer to 30 or 35. And I just like to keep them lubed. I don't want to hear any noises. Increased ride is great due to these coilovers and this upper control arm. So I want to keep that way. One more thing I forgot to mention, if you're doing this job, actually you need to be very careful, I would think, because they're concave for a reason. You need to be very careful with this washer. This is on the front of the lower control arm. There is some slight taper to the edge of it, and that actually goes towards the frame. And then this here nut goes on the back side of it. So I'm assuming they did it that way for a reason, so let's keep it that way. Alrighty, and one more thing while I'm ahead of the game. While I am thinking about it now, some of you guys are gonna say, why don't you just replace the ball joint? Circle it, pop one out, put a new ball joint in. Reason being, I know I hook up at lube. So I'm gonna go ahead and get all that stuff in there while I can. One more thing I noticed, actually while taking this apart, is, one thing I had noticed for a while actually, is that these bushings are just a tad, you know, cracked right there. One of the things that I had just noticed after I pulled it off is look at that little metal sleeve in there. That is all bent up, kind of scored and whatnot. There was pretty heavy impact. I had, pretty much know exactly where that came from. But as you can tell, and as you can probably guess, the new ones do not have that scoring or that bend. So I guess it really pays to take it all apart and take a look at it. Alrighty, so the process to put the lower control arm, the new one, back in is going to be the reverse of what I did to pull the other one out. So to pull the other one out, I cotter pin, castle nut, pop the stud out with a pickle fork. See, I supported the brake with this towel and jack, not to mess anything up. Then I just took this here hammer, hammered down on the lower control arm until she popped out. Supported with my hand, obviously don't want it banging around with nothing to support it. And then wiggled it out of what was left of the stud out of there. So what I'm going to do to put the new one in, barely slide the stud in the taper, and then get the lower control arm bushings up into these two brackets. Might need some slight hammering. I'll go ahead and grab the dead weight instead of this metal-ended one so I don't score anything of the cast control that's going to go in. And then I'll just wiggle her in, put the bolts back in, and she'll be good to go. Oh, and I guess before I put it in, one thing I was always taught, and I would actually recommend for you guys to do, is get a little bit of grease from your grease gun, or whatever the heck you're using to get your grease. Get a little bit of it, make sure your fingers are at least semi-clean, and actually grease up the taper. Helps it slide into the spindle, or whatever you're trying to seat this taper in, just because, you know, there's a little bit of grease. Metal doesn't hang up on metal as easily that way. Arms in, took some wiggling, which is pretty typical if you're trying to cut corners like I'm doing. So it's in the taper now. I just need to get the castle nut on there. Always, always, always with bushings like this, any bushing of any kind really, and studs, is bushings, first of all, you never want to torque them down fully until you are at ride height. So for now, I literally don't even have the nut on it. Just got it set in there. What I'm going to do is seat this castle nut first, and then what I'll do is I'll hand tighten the nuts that go on the lower control arm bolts. And then when I'm happy with what I've done so far, you know, put the Zerg fitting in and whatnot, greased her up, I will lower her down to ride height, give a couple jumps, make the suspension bounce a little bit, settle, and then once it is settled, I will then torque these lower control arm bushings to spec. Like I said, you do not want to torque bushings down too early. When you do, you put a little bit of preload in the bushing, can cause bushing wear and fatigue and failure much sooner in their lifespan than they should. One of the things I forgot to mention in that last little clip is that when you are putting on, you know, a nut of any kind, bolt, anything like that, you never want to grab a torque wrench first, or a gun, or a socket. You always want to thread them on by hand first. A couple reasons. You actually aren't as strong with your hand as you are with a torque gun, or with a little bit of leverage. And that's good for a couple reasons. See, I was able to thread that on with my hand. If I had a torque wrench and I didn't have it on the threads perfectly, would have just destroyed those threads by doing it on either the castle nut or the actual stud itself. This would be the same for, you know, your coil over to lower control arm bolts, upper control arm stuff, you know, pretty much anything that's a bolt, you have to thread it on with a nut. Always want to do it by hand. It keeps you from screwing up the threads that's on there. I use the air gun, torque it down a little bit. I got nice and lucky. I can see daylight through the stud and the castle nut. So I'm just gonna go ahead and grab the cotter pin that comes in the box with the Moog lower control arm. I'm gonna grab a pair of needle nose pliers here in a second. Bend that cotter pin around so that it, you know, touches the castle nut, doesn't come loose. Once that's done, I'm gonna put the Zerg fitting in right there. That's so you can lube the integral dust cap right there. I believe I messed up in one of the earlier segments. This dust cap right here, not bushing, sorry. It'll actually sink down and cover part of this stud. You get a little more protection from dust and whatnot. There's actually a little, so you don't over inflate them and pop them, I suppose, with grease and tear the cup off. There actually is a C-pole somewhere up in there that when it folds down, and it lets you know when it's full. Alrighty guys, one little quick thing about the new lower control arm. Had this little discard, she says discard on it. It's where the Zerg fitting fits in. On the new one, it's a discard, and I recommend leaving it in until you should get the arm all settled in so no dust and stuff falls into that boot, and then when you're ready to put the Zerg fitting in, go ahead and put her on in. Alrighty, so now I have, you know, greased up the tie rod end, lower control arm, upper control arms. I haven't done the uniball yet with the tri-flow. I'm gonna jack it up with the tire on it, get it ride high a little bit because it exposes a little more of that uniball, makes it a little easier. Once I do that, like I said before in that, you know, that advice little piece I said about bushings and stuff, I'm gonna bounce on the truck, probably open up the door a little bit, step on the footing a little bit and probably jump on it. Get the suspension to compress down to normal ride height, like I was saying earlier, and then go ahead and hit those with the air gun and then check them with the torque wrench. I'm gonna go ahead and double check, but I'm pretty sure the torque spec is in the neighborhood of 132 or 136 for the lower control arm. It might be 119 actually, now that I think about it. Alrighty, so now once you get the wheels back on, you're gonna wanna torque them to spec. This truck's torque spec for the wheels and tires and, you know, its model. It's a 2013 GMC Sierra 1500 SLE, two-wheel drive. 140 foot-pounds, you know, typical torque wrench job. What I recommend doing, obviously to make it easiest and safest on the car parts and yourself and whatnot, is to actually put the truck in park and the e-brake. I set the e-brake first, then put it in neutral, put it in park, whatnot. Just to alleviate stress off the transmission. It's an extra step when you park it, but I feel like it makes the transmission last a little longer, easier on the U-joints with the drive shaft and the drive shaft itself. Maybe something in the rear end. Now I've also lubed everything in the front end. Upper control arm uniball with tri-flow. Upper control arm bushings with the grease gun. Same with the tie rod end right here. Can't really see it. It's back behind the tire. Same with the actual lower ball joint itself. The piece that was the whole reason for doing this video in the first place. I will go ahead and torque these lower control arms to spec really quick now that I've bounced on the suspension, let it settle a little bit. And then I will go ahead and take it for a test drive. I've actually also lubed the other side, you know, all the same stuff. I had to take the wheel off once again, but it's easy enough once you've done it quite a few times. Let me know if you guys want to see a walk around for the whole truck, you know, mods list and whatnot. Hasn't changed too much in a while. Just a lot of little stuff, you know, like a different D-ring that I put in the receiver hitch kind of thing. It's pretty dirty right now, so just let me know if you guys want to see that. And have a good one, guys.